Hello, my name is Daniel Adibi, and I am your host for Our World 101, the show in which we discuss complicated, real-world events and issues to bridge people together. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Jamal Lake, who is the executive director at Our Kids Read, a nonprofit organization with the goal of addressing the literacy gap in our nation. Currently, the US faces alarmingly low literacy rates. The national average of fourth graders in 2022 who were deemed proficient at grade level reading was just 33%. And when we look at the statistic for BIPOC students, that number drops drastically to just 18 to 23%, which is nearly half of the national percentage at its lowest. Jamal Lake, through his organization, is attempting to address this issue by donating books to BIPOC students in the schools they attend and hosting virtual reading buddy sessions where students can read alongside mentors to further foster their interest in reading. So, Mr. Lake, welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you here.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. As my first question, I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about Our Kids Read and what it does in some more detail.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me again. Our Kids Read, we're a relatively young organization. We've been around for about 3 years, and it's really my mother's vision. She was the educator in our family. She was a professor at the University of Iowa for about 10 years. And after that, she was an elementary and middle school teacher in Kansas City, Missouri. And, unfortunately, a few years ago, she got mesothelioma. And, before she passed, she said, Jamal, I need you to carry on this vision. I need you to take this beautiful organization that I can envision but hasn't kind of materialized yet, and really grow it into what it's capable of being. So, she said, I want you to use half of your inheritance to start this foundation, Our Kids Read. So I took about $100,000 and, in 2021, we got our 501c3 and really just had a mission of getting books to kids, especially in low income communities, focusing on diversity and representation. So, books featuring African American, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, both authors and main characters. So I say in the first few years, we've given away maybe 150,000 books or so. But I'll be honest, early in the process, we realized that giving books by itself is not enough, right? A lot of the kids that we were giving books to couldn't read, right? So what's really the value of giving a fourth grader who's functionally illiterate a book by itself, right? I mean, it's a piece of the puzzle. I don't by any means want to, poo-poo the idea of, getting books to kids, but I think what mistake people make is thinking that getting books to kids is the answer,
Yeah.
right? It's a piece of the puzzle. And so
Mhm.
that's when we started our Reading Buddies program. So what we do is we actually read to children in the evening. We have our volunteers from our Fortune 100 partners, Microsoft, Nike, Verizon, some other folks, and they read one-on-one over Zoom to the children that we serve. And we find that to be incredibly helpful in really getting kids to want to read. Because I don't know if you realize these days kids don't want to read, right? Like if they have a choice between their device and a book, right? I mean, there are people that get paid to make these devices addictive, right? So it's very difficult. And I think that's the piece that people are missing is that we have to convince these kids that books are a good idea, right? And we do that through mentorship, right? The idea is if a kid loves basketball, for example, you show him books about Kobe, right? You show him books about LeBron, you show him books about Jordan, whatever, and you show him that those interests and those passions that he has or she has can be found in a book, and it can be just as exciting, if not more exciting, than what's found on a digital device. So that's really what we try to do is we try to turn non-readers into readers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sure.
I guess something else I was wondering also is obviously there are a lot of disparities in our country with education, with healthcare. Why did you choose literacy as the issue that you wanted to focus on most?
Yeah, again, I consider myself a disciple of my mother. Right? She was a former Panther, incredibly militant, incredibly revolutionary, and she would always talk about the keys to people of color kind of coming out of this culture of servitude. And she said it starts with literacy, right? It starts with obviously control of your own resources, like we're seeing in Africa now. But more than anything, it starts with education. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And being an educator herself, that was drilled into me. I was reading, Frantz Fanon and Toni Morrison at like 8. Right. So I was the kid, with the flashlight under the covers, reading the book at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I mean, I think for me, um, it showed me, and my mother was the first person in our family to go to college, and she did that through books, and through literacy. She got her PhD from Cornell, encouraged me to get my undergrad from Princeton, and just everything in my life has shown me that books and literacy are the key to really making a systemic change.
Yeah, definitely. And something else that I was also wondering, something I thought was pretty interesting is your background before, joining Our Kids Read. You did
Hmm.
software engineering, which I think is interesting because it's not something that people would typically associate with literacy initiatives. So something I was
Exactly.
wondering is how you transitioned from that to what you do now, and how that previous work has shaped your perspective on what you're doing.
That's a great question. And it's a very tough answer for me to give only because I don't want to step on the toes of people in this literacy space who know a lot more than me, who've been in the trenches, who've done the hard work. So, keep in mind, so take this with a grain of salt, what I'm about to say. Um, I think that God put me in this position intentionally, right? I think that the combination of technology and literacy is something that has not been fully explored. I also think that we as human beings have no idea what the world is going to look like in a year, right? We have no idea what artificial intelligence is going to mean in
Yeah,
1 year, in 2 years. Maybe there's going to be an AI literacy tutor, right? Who can just go to a child and be like, hey, do you know your ABCs? Do you know your phonics? And if you don't, I'm going to teach you, right? Who knows, right? So the way we're approaching it is we're taking the kind of tried and true literacy strategies and we're saying, why don't we create a platform where that's free? And that's the kicker, right? Is that a
yeah,
lot of people try to monetize this because they have the profit motive, but we are a nonprofit. So the idea is the kids that need this don't have the money for 19.99 a month,
yeah,
right? So we need to create a platform that's free and universally accessible that teaches children how to read. And so what we're really banking on is technology that doesn't yet exist. I know that
yeah,
sounds crazy, right? But we're banking on creating the network of families and children that once the technology exists, it can just be plugged into that network and children can learn from the AI technologies that are developed over the next couple of years. So our goal is really just to create the network so that we can facilitate technology teaching kids how to read.
yeah. And I think that's a really interesting vision. Again, not something that many people would consider, but definitely one that could become very powerful if we get the technology to do so.
Yeah.
Um,
And keep in mind, again, no shade to folks that go to their local YMCA or Boys and Girls Club, sit down one-on-one with a student and read with them, right? Super powerful, super transformative. But the question is, can you do that at scale, right? Can you get 1 million people going to their local YMCA reading to a child? You can't. But
yeah,
what you
exactly.
can do is you can scale technology,
Yeah,
right? And I think that's what people are missing is that the days of in-person one-on-one mentoring, in my mind, are over, right? We need to start thinking about how to leverage IT and remote technology to really reach these kids. And laptops. I learned recently that over 40% of low-income students don't have technology in the home.
yeah,
Travesty. Do you know how many laptops we throw away in this country? How many Chromebooks get recycled air quotes, from elementary schools and from colleges? And I've learned about this about books too. It's not that there aren't enough books. It's not that there aren't enough laptops. It's the distribution.
right. Yeah,
And it's kind of like this country, right? This country throws away food, but yet we have starving people, right?
yeah,
This country
exactly.
throws away technology, yet we have kids with no technology. So, as a Princeton grad, I see myself as uniquely positioned to talk to titans of industry to say, stop it, right? Stop it. Like, you have the money, you have the overflow. Make sure it gets to the right people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I also want to talk a little bit. I know that's like your long-term vision with the organization, but also like how you're currently approaching the literacy gap. You do it in two main ways. One is getting books to all the kids, and the second is having mentors who can help these books or help these children foster their interest in reading more. with the donating books part, I know that you have free bookstores and you also work with school districts to get these books to students. Can you describe how you do both of those things in a little bit more detail?
You've clearly done your research. No, well done. No, yes. So the books are really what I think of as a hook into the reading program, right? So like what school, what elementary school is going to say no to 1,000 free children's books? Like very
Yeah.
few, right? As a matter of fact, we haven't had any yet. So what we do is we go to a school and we say, hey, we want to give you guys 1,000 books. We want to bring in a storyteller, a West African drummer, get the kids excited about, story. And again, they always say yes. And once they say yes, with the donation of books, we give them an invitation to our free reading program, right? So unfortunately, I would say our conversion rate is about 40%. So 40% of the kids that we give the invitation to sign up. And unfortunately, there, half of those people flake. So our true conversion rate is about 20%. So
Yeah.
if we give the flyer to 100 kids, we'll have 20 new students in our program by the end of that partnership, which is, not terrible.
Yeah.
Our target is about 2 million students in the next 5 years reading with us. And I think we'll get there. I think it's just an issue of shoring up our technology, and then scaling in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned something that I also wanted to talk about, which was I think they're called free book festivals, where
Yeah.
you organize them through a community center or a school. In addition to giving away free books, you bring West African drummers or Latin American musicians who will sometimes enact the stories being told. And I think that's
Yes.
a very unique perspective where you're adding oral storytelling to an interest in written literature. Have you found that that oral storytelling component has enhanced students' interests a lot? And like, what
Oh
is
my God. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, the power of storytelling is so underrated, right? I don't think people understand the transformative, it's almost like, going to the theater. If you've never been to the theater, you might laugh at it or not really understand like how amazing it could be. But when you have somebody who really kind of gets the energy of a story and is able to transmit to that audience and kind of bake in all of the history and pain and joy and love and whatever it is embodied in that story, the audience feels that, right? And as a child, it's even more impactful, right? To have that storytelling culture from a young age. And we're finding the kids are just transfixed. We have one storyteller, her name is April Armstrong, who is just, I mean, she's been on Hollywood, I mean, not Hollywood, Broadway. She's been in theaters and in plays. She's just amazing. She had one recently where she talks about a song that she wants to teach the children, and it's like a song of resistance from the apartheid era, and kind of what the song meant, and that it was children who were singing this song. So she was kind of showing the children's agency in South Africa, and that hey, yeah, you're 12, but look at what these kids in South Africa were able to do, through their song and through their energy. We actually just had a Scholastic recently partnered with us to promote a national storytelling and book giveaway program. So we're super excited about that.
Yeah.
We're probably going to start applying for funding for that in the next few months. But yeah, we think it's transformative.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's great how you're really trying to use all these unique ways, technology, oral storytelling to get students interested in books. And I think, we've talked a lot about how you're getting the books to students, but as you mentioned, that's not enough. You have to actually make sure that the students are interested in reading them. And you do that through your virtual reading buddy program. Can you describe how that operates a little bit?
Sure, sure, yeah. So our normal entry point is, I don't know if you're familiar with affinity groups or employee resource groups within a company. It might be,
Yeah.
ones that come to mind are Wham and Wham and Bam, women at Microsoft and blacks at Microsoft. Those types of groups that bring folks together that are, have similar culture ideologies. um, we'll go into an organization like that just over LinkedIn and say, hey, here's a program, an opportunity we'd like to present to your membership. Will you let us give a 5-minute volunteer pitch to, your fraternity, your sorority, your, ERG? And again, we get about a 20% conversion, right? So about 20% of those folks say, yep, I'd love to read with one of your students. So we, background screen them, we train them, kind of teach them how to build rapport with a child, because not everybody's a parent. Um, And ultimately, we match them with one of our students. And usually we match based on gender. We always match boys with men. And with women, we leave it, and it's really up to the parents. But if the parents don't have a specific, um, gender, then that's how we do our matching. Women, we try to match with girls. Um, and most of our volunteers are women, so that's pretty easy. Um, and they read together once a week over Zoom for 8 weeks. So we give them a portal to log into on our website. They click the join session button, and then they're immediately joined to their student. And the first, half hour or so might just be getting to know you. And then after that, they share their screen and read ebooks together for the rest of the time. And it's ebooks again. The idea is all about choice. So we want the student to feel like, hey, I'm picking the book. And this is about, topics that I care about. And so the reading buddy is really just, I think about it just like a guiding from the edges. You maybe want to help someone sound something out every now and then, but most of the time it's either the reading buddy or reading to the student if the student is not a fluid reader, or sometimes it's a student reading to the reading buddy. It really depends. Or sometimes they take turns. One person will read a page, then
Yeah.
the other person will read a page. It really depends on the relationship. But again, we let the student dictate that. It's a comfortable space. We want it to be
Mhm.
a safe space for that student. So whatever they're comfortable with is what we do.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you said that you target affinity groups at some of your partners at like corporations. Is that the typical demographic of volunteers, or do you have like a wide range of ages and professions?
It really ranges. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about our program is that we've had people from retirement homes call us and say, hey, we've got hundreds of former educators and principals and, just folks who have nothing but time on their hands, right? We've had fraternities and sororities. The Divine Nine, we had the Omegas came out to a volunteer event. The AKAs just expressed some interest in partnering with us. Um, it's just been an outpouring of support, and it really ranges from all ethnicities, all ages. We actually just had our first high school chapter formed at the Academy of the Holy Angels in Demarest, New Jersey, complete with a president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. So they go out and they recruit high school girls who want to read with a child in their community. So it's really starting to gain some momentum. So much so I actually quit my job yesterday. My last day is July 11th. So I was kind of doing double time between the two. But yeah, July 11th, I'll be doing Our Kids Read full time.
Yeah, and another thing that I was also wondering is you have these great programs for kids. How do you gauge how do you gauge how much a student has grown from it? Like, do you have surveys for the students? How do you understand what effect it's had on the students you work
Great
with?
question. Yeah, I mean, these are all fantastic questions. So the first thing we do is pre and post surveys around affinity for reading, right? Have we indeed turned a reader into or a non-reader into a reader? The second is actual hard data from the school. So we're looking at attendance, Dibble scores, and I'm hesitant to kind of toot our own horn, about, the difference between students in our group versus the students who are not in the Reading Buddies program because it's so preliminary. We've only been doing this for 2 years now. So we've had about 8 cohorts.
Yeah.
But we're looking to release that data in the next year or so.
Okay, yeah. And one other thing I was wondering also is I know your organization works a lot on a volunteer basis, but obviously the events you host um, and the books you donate require funding for it. How do you fundraise for your organization?
So it's a great question. I mean, we have a part-time grant writer right now, but I think that's an area where we're looking to expand. Like, we really need to get into the foundation community. People don't really know who we are, right? Because we haven't really done that outreach. So I think that's the next step once I become a full-time ED is to begin that outreach and figure out which of the foundations like what we're doing. And I think that's what it is. It's not about convincing a foundation because I don't think you're going to do that. It's finding where there's a natural affinity, and that's what we need to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, definitely. And I know one. aspect of reading that your organization highlights a lot is representation in literature,
Hmm.
having books that reflect who you are as a person, having, protagonists who look like what you look like or
Yep.
reflect your values. What differences have you seen in terms of students engaging with the reading that they're doing when they are represented in the books rather than when they're not?
It's a great question. I want to give you an honest answer. It varies, is my answer. There are some kids who naturally gravitate towards what's popular. For example, I think coming to mind are like Dog Man and Bone and a few others that kids just absolutely love, which are not what I would call diverse books.
Right, yeah.
So we have I would say about half of our students are in that category, and the other half do gravitate towards books where characters look like them and they even exclaim, right? So we record all of our sessions. And so sometimes I'll go through just for this reason, to see what kids are reading. What are they enjoying? And I'm hearing things like, oh, I want that one. She looks just like me, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
That's what we want. Um, and I had read, before I started down this journey that, it made a difference, but to see it is something else, and it's heartwarming.
Yeah, definitely. And for my last question for you, we're talking a lot about how you are approaching this issue of the literacy gap, a lot about the solution to it. But in terms of the actual problem, as somebody with a very unique perspective on this issue, what have you found as the root cause? I know there are a lot of factors going into it, but what have you deemed as the most significant?
I mean, I think that there is a culture of an intentional, right? This isn't not, I don't know if I hope this doesn't come off sounding like a conspiracy theory, but not I think everything in our society is engineered, right? So you have to ask yourself, if you really wanted people to be literate, they would be literate, right? So it's almost people always ask me, why don't you work through the schools? And I'm like, have the schools worked to date? Like, we're doing something that's different because we see what's not working and we're trying to take lessons from other folks. But I think the answer is you have to work outside of existing systems. And I know that's an unpopular belief, but in my mind it's just common sense. If the existing systems aren't working, then you need to create your own.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a really admirable message that you have. And it really just shows how great the work that you're doing is because you're seeing something that's not working in our country. We have very low literacy rates, and you're taking action to create a new system to address that issue.
And keep in mind, I'm letting people smarter than me actually address it, right? All we're doing is providing the kids. And we're
Yeah,
saying, hey, we're building these networks of children. You smart people who know more about literacy than me, come onto our platform. Even if you want to make money, that's fine. But we're concerned about the kids,
yeah,
right? So we're going to let you do your job, bring your literacy software over here, and we'll connect it with the kids that need it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, Mr. Lake, thank you again so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our discussion. I learned a lot about the work you're doing, and I think, I just want to thank you again also
Happy
for
to do
everything
it.
that you're doing. It's definitely a big issue that you're addressing. You're doing some great work with it, so thank you.
Appreciate the words, man. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. To all our viewers, I hope you'll join us for our next episode. I'm Daniel Adibi, and I'll see you soon.